Welcome to the book review for Difficult Mothers, Adult Daughters by Karen C.L Anderson. So whilst this book specifies for adult daughters, having read through it, I think that it's really relevant for both male, female, non-binary people. Whilst there is discussion throughout the book of what it's like to be a woman in our society, the points that she makes, the tasks that Karen talks about, and the meditations that are included and the journal prompts, they can all be used by everyone. So if you've got a difficult relationship with your mother, then I really recommend this book. I love the fact that it contains theory as well as practical things that you can do. And the main idea is around building awareness, acceptance, and moving forward with a difficult relationship with your mother. So today I'm going to share a couple of the key learnings that I found and some other reflections so that you can see if this is a book that you want to invest in. So in the book there is a chapter called Living in Either or Land. And this is the idea of that sometimes we feel that we have to be all or nothing. I'm going to either have to completely sever the relationship with my mum, or maybe I have to just completely reduce all of my boundaries and allow my mum to treat me the way that she does. So in this chapter, Karen really reflects on this and provides us with an opportunity to see that we don't have to live in either or land, that we have choices. Karen talks about how we often presume how each other feel. We go through the cognitive distortion of mind reading. Now that comes from years of unconscious learning. And so whilst it's completely understandable, it is slightly unhelpful. And so Karen allows us to reflect on the idea that what if we don't know how she's feeling? And what if Mum doesn't need to know what it is that we're doing in terms of how we are managing this relationship? We don't have to have a really overt conversation with her to say, Mum, this is how I'm dealing with you now. But instead we can put some tools in place to help build our resilience. What's your story? Karen has a couple of chapters around reflecting on our story with our mum. And this is really interesting because we go through life feeling that those stories that we tell ourselves are factual, when in actual fact they are made up of facts, as well as our own perceptions and biases. I think that it's brilliant that Karen includes quite a few chapters around our story, because ultimately, if we can really reflect on the story and the narrative that we are living in terms of the relationship with our mum, then we might be able to retell that story in a way that helps us feel that we are strong and that we are a main character in that story, rather than just being the victim. I love this quote that Karen includes from Brene Brown, which says, "Owning our stories and loving ourselves through that process is the bravest thing that we will ever do." Karen then reflects, "I used to think that owning my story meant telling anyone who would listen about all the things that my mother did and said to me. When I came across Brene's quote, I wondered why she had said it was brave, because I didn't feel brave. I usually felt a combination of vindication and guilt. I didn't realise what it meant to truly own my story, but once I did, I started to understand what Brene meant when she said it is the bravest thing we will ever do. So what is a story? Here's the distinction I like to make. There's what happened, the facts, and then there's what we've made it to mean, specifically about us and our mothers. That is the story. What matters most about our stories is the way in which we tell them and the meaning we derive from them. By our very nature, humans create meaning. Since meaning comes with looking back, we have the opportunity to make meaning that either holds us back or supports our growth. Our stories have always got the potential to do both." And so what Karen is talking about here is that there are the facts of what has happened, the observable things that people will have seen, the things that have been said. But there's also a large amount of our story which is made up of the things that are unconscious, the things that we have presumed to be true, the way that we have felt. And by retelling the story, we can do it in a way that allows us to feel strong, to feel like the main character, and to feel like we have control. And so therefore to feel empowered within that story. Sometimes when we think about our story, it's quite clear that maybe we have a right to feel angry, a right to feel frustrated and annoyed by the way that we've been treated. However, we have to ask ourselves, how helpful is this story? Is it empowering me to move forward? And what painful beliefs is it contributing to? If I felt that my mum did things that made me seem unlovable, things that you would never do to someone that you would love, if that is the story, then it would make sense that I would feel or have a belief that I was unlovable, and that would come into other areas of my life. Maybe I would become a people pleaser. Maybe I would have my guard up a lot. Maybe I would have a disorganized attachment style, which makes it difficult for me to really build bonds with people. And so if we can retell our story, we can start to unpick and unpack all of these beliefs that feel so true, when in actual fact, they are things that have happened to us and things that we can move past. But what about the anger, sadness, grief, bitterness, guilt that I still feel? Karen starts this chapter by reflecting on a quote by Dr. Gabor Mate, who is really well renowned in the field of psychology for a lot of his work. The quote says, "The essence of trauma is disconnection from ourselves. Trauma is not terrible things that happen from the other side. Those are traumatic. But the trauma is the very separation from the body and emotions." So the real question is, how did we get separated and how do we reconnect? Because that's our true nature. Our true nature is to be connected. In fact, if that wasn't our true nature, there would be no human beings. The human species, or any species, could not evolve without being grounded in their bodies. And so what Gabor is talking about here is that there is a difference between trauma and traumatic things that have happened to us or experiences that we have had. He talks about how can we reconnect with our body, because trauma is what separates us from our body. And so Karen begins to talk about how we can learn to sit with our feelings, something that therapists are often talking about but sounds quite odd and can leave people questioning, well, what does it really mean to sit with my feelings? In this chapter, Karen talks about acceptance and commitment therapy techniques, though she doesn't quite label it as those. This is the idea that we can mindfully reflect on what is going on for us, that there's nothing to fix about these difficult emotions in terms of anger, grief, sadness. They're very human emotions, things that we all feel. And so rather than feeling that we need to fix or cure those emotions, Karen's talking about how we can mindfully accept them, acknowledge their presence, and allow them to just be until they pass. Triggers and buttons and thorns. Oh my. In this chapter, Karen talks about the idea that we all have triggers, or as she likes to call them, thorns. The thing is that our mothers often know what our triggers or our thorns are, and we can have our guard up. We are nervous because that thorn is so painful that any time she may come close to it, we assume that she's wanting to prod at it. Ultimately, we build a life around not getting hurt. Karen says something that's quite interesting about this. She says, but here's the thing, when we believe that we have triggers, buttons and thorns, we're giving away all of our power. We're making others responsible for how we feel. The alternative is to understand that you can remove that thorn, and if you remove it, you won't have to think about it again. And so then Karen reflects on how you can start to understand and build an awareness of what your triggers or thorns are. Now this is really important because if we can have that awareness, then we can start to remove the thorn, as Karen says. She says, your mother may well be deliberately manipulating you and creating frustrating circumstances. She may know your buttons well enough to activate your meltdown. When you recognise that this is what she's doing, you can choose not to allow it to work. She also includes some activities and journal exercises to help you to build some objectivity into the experiences that you have with your mum, to take away some of the emotional experience and just stay with the facts. Boundaries. Now this is something that comes up a lot with clients, and the reason for this is because we can feel incredibly guilty for putting boundaries in place. Maybe if you have a difficult relationship with your mother, then you've been brought up to not have your boundaries respected. And so to get into adult life and to try to put those in place can feel really challenging. So there's a few chapters that Karen includes to talk about what boundaries actually are and what stops us or prevents us from putting them in place. Now this is really helpful because I think this is something that a lot of people struggle with, and if you are in the process of trying to put boundaries in place with your mum, then the thing that I would reflect on is that this takes practice. You've had a whole lifetime of doing things one way, so you're not going to be able to immediately change the way that you are interacting. It will take time, but that's okay. And finally, remothering. Now there's a lot of really in-depth clinical work that we can do in the therapy room when it comes to remothering. You might have heard about things like the inner child, and in this book Karen talks about how we can start to connect with our inner child and give ourselves what it is that we need in those moments. This can be something that is really difficult to go through, so if you find when you're reading this book that this starts to open some wounds for you, then make sure you speak to a professional who can support you with this. And remember that you're always able to stop whenever you need to. I think the way that Karen is talking about self-soothing in this chapter is incredibly valuable, and it's a really interesting topic to really get your teeth into, and reinforces the idea that we are strong enough and we are empowered, and we may have a difficult relationship with our mother, but that we can always remother ourselves and give ourselves exactly what it is that we need. So if you have a difficult relationship with your mum, whether you are male, female or non-binary, I do really recommend this book. I think that it's got some brilliant prompts and some great, really meaty subjects that have been tackled in here. It's something that I've recommended to several clients now and have had really positive feedback from. So I look forward to hearing how you get on, and I'll see you soon.